Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
This is our November meeting of the Northport Village Corporation Board of Overseers. I'm John Spitz, President of the NVC, and we have a good, full agenda. Today we have a quorum, I see, of overseers here, which is always important. And I'd like first a motion to approve the minutes of the October 14th meeting of the Board of Overseers. So is there a second? And that's second by Liz.
Well, I want to have discussion.
Just a second. Give me a second. Is there any discussion?
Yeah, I think that we need to amend them. There were three votes taken at the conclusion of the executive committee that were taken outside that aren't reflected in the minutes. So I would ask that they be amended to reflect those votes, and I guess we'll get them out and see what they said.
I agree. I didn't have a chance to read it fully, but I did jump to see what the conclusions were, because that was the meat of it, really.
Right.
It wasn't there, so.
So, as amended, is there a vote by the overseers to approve the minutes?
You have to accept that change.
Well, they accept.
She'll send them out.
As amended?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, I'm just needing to.
fine. All in favor? It's unanimous, thank you. A note that before we proceed further, that our overseer Michael Terrell is not with us today. He sent a note around, I believe, a day or two ago regarding safety committee, some thoughts on that. And that our overseer Wendy Huntoon has resigned from the board, so we're currently at the status of 6 overseers. We twice in the meeting have an opportunity for questions and issues from Bayside residents and meeting attendees. Is there anyone who'd like to speak? Please feel free to do so. And what we ask is that you sort of come up to that corner of the table there and kind of turn your body a little bit so that the camera will be able to pick you up. Just identify who you are, where you live, and whatever your cause or issue is, please. Whoever would like to go, may.
Hi, I'm Gina Cressy, and I'm just here to represent the safety committee when that topic comes up. Any of you have any questions? Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else? Just a reminder, we also have an opportunity at the end of the meeting for a similar scenario for people to speak up, so this is not the only opportunity. Anyone else? Seeing none, I'll close that portion of the meeting for the time being. It's now the report of the president. There's a few items on here, and I've added a few others since then. Sometimes I have nothing to say. Today I have a few things to talk about. First, I'm going to mention that we, for the last few years, have given a gift certificate for the fellow who does our salt and sand distributing throughout the winter, which is a critical issue for us from the town of Northport, I believe, through them. So I don't remember how much that has been for in the past.
I think it was 100.
100?
Yeah.
And I think that I've purchased a gift certificate and written a short note, and I suspect I've been the one responsible for that in the past. So,
Well, I know at the last meeting, a mention was said about getting a gift certificate local. So
Right.
I can pick up a local gift certificate if you want to do a card or type out something.
and you know who that's going to? Bill?
Bobby.
Bobby.
I'll look it up.
Bobby.
Okay, you'll get in touch with the okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
Secondly, there have been a few changes lately over at town of Northport, and I think that all the overseers were copied on that. But the longtime town clerk Janine Tucker is leaving that position, and as in the words from the town of Northport, it says filling her shoes will be difficult, but they started the search for a new town clerk. Indeed, that will be difficult. She's been a very helpful partner of ours through the years. And so with the approval of the overseers, I'll write a letter to the town of Northport expressing our appreciation of her over time. And I don't know if I need a vote on that, I'm just letting you know.
I was wondering if an honorarium of some sort would be appropriate. I think I remember that we did some flowers when the last town manager left. I think Janine's last day has already happened.
No, the 30th, it has not happened.
So I think it would be nice to maybe do some flowers.
Sure. Anybody have any issues with that, or? I assume that's something we can get locally, and is there a floral shop in
Yeah.
Belfast?
I did it for Barbara.
Okay.
Yeah,
I would hope so.
yeah.
Thank you.
So up to $75.
What's the usual amount we get?
I think it was up to $75, including delivery last time, and she's picking it up.
Okay.
Then you can make 5 more flowers and you can have any for the delivery.
I also want to just mention that starting, excuse me, I believe 2 meetings ago, we've been dealing with the issue of the property at the corner of Griffin and George Street, which is now in flux. And there's some dispute about ownership of various parcels at that corner, the relationship of the village to those parcels, etc. Some of those conversations and some of those actions are occurring in executive session. They're legal matters. Some of them are more public, and I'll let you know that between last meeting and this meeting, I sent a letter both to the town of Northport, the code enforcement officer, as well as to the attorney representing the party in this case, expressing that the Board of Overseers hopes and intends that the process will move in an appropriate and cautious manner, and that we have interest in the area, and that there are surveys extant that we believe apply to this situation. We haven't received any reply yet, but I'm just, as delicately as possible, say that there are essentially 2 tracks at least running here, one of which is a public track in which we can talk about actions that the Board of Overseers has taken, and there's a sort of executive session, more private track that's happening. The intent is not in any way to hold things from the public, just that some of these matters are of a legal nature and can be discussed publicly. Any commentary, Judy?
Just to your last comment, to be clear, we haven't received a reply from the town,
Yes.
but the town, there was a reply
Oh, I did.
from the attorney.
Oh, that's correct, yes.
And he sent along some further additional materials that we reviewed, and we'll have an executive session to review that, to bring you all up to speed, to get your recommendations.
Correct. I next want to bring up the issue of the safety committee. Subsequent to our last meeting as a board, a couple of things happened somewhat close in time. One was that Wendy Huntoon resigned, who headed our safety committee, and pretty much on the heels of that, members of the safety committee asked to speak with me just to talk about some of the issues that they felt were concerning them regarding the committee, its mission, its role, its operations. I very briefly encapsulated those for the overseers and sent them around. Michael Terrell, who also sits in that committee, who's not here with us today, sent around, I think, yesterday a follow-up email which highlights some of the issues as he sees them. I have spoken to Beanie, particularly regarding what the critical official actions are that the committee needs to undertake in the near future, and the most critical of those is that by the end of January, I believe, we need to report back to the Maine Criminal Justice Academy on certain forms regarding a police chief and whether certain actions were or weren't taken. It's a thing that we do every single year. I have to sign off on it. So I just have to stay on top of that. Usually the safety committee is sort of pushing that. But the safety committee has, in essence, asked to step back or step down for the moment so that the overseers can think about how that committee is structured and what its role might be. I don't necessarily feel that this meeting is the time to undertake that conversation. And if this were April, I'd be much more concerned, but we have a little lead time in terms of when some of the actions are taken by the committee. I believe strongly that that committee will be reconstituted, and I just want to sort of give that as a preamble and invite maybe overseers now to comment.
The only thing that I would remind us all is that we don't have the authority to not have a safety committee, and we don't have the authority to not have a overseer as the chair of a safety committee. But I think that my personal view is that John's caution in giving us some breathing space to think about this till January is a appropriate one. We have to make sure we make the right decision as to which chair, which overseer wants that really important job, and who the members would be. I think it also parries off of the conversation we had last month about the personnel committee.
Vicki?
And I'll second that. I was going to say, it sounds to me the concern is one of liability, where that ends and begins, and management of personnel. And those are valid concerns as things get really busy in the summer. We have to figure out how we're going to handle it.
Mike?
I also think we need to balance when we talk about personnel, when we do it in executive session, when we do it in open meeting. So we probably do need a couple of executive sessions between now and then anyway to sort of talk about the personnel and how that's going to work out.
Yeah, personnel, executive sessions for the purpose of personnel is a individual discussion. If you were talking about Billy, then that can be an executive session. If you're talking about concepts, that has to be public. So, and I know that there's a difficulty in overlap.
There's a lot of overlap there. So I don't mind freely in the executive session and then talk about what we think is public out of that. I think would be probably the safe way because there is so much overlap.
So it may be that the 2-month gap between now and January is a time for people to not only think about this, perhaps put together some ideas about how that safety committee could be differently formulated. Yes, Vicki?
Would you be able to give us, I'm assuming you'll be able to give us some insight into what the liability issues are for the people that are, I think the people making these decisions are afraid that it's going to come back to them if something, I mean, you don't have to do it now, but
Yeah,
you have that information.
I encourage you all to have an umbrella policy, and I encourage you all to talk to your insurer about that. My personal view is that because we're public officials, we are protected in the work that we do in our public capacity unless we act in a grossly negligent fashion or an intentional fashion. I mean, intentionally malicious. If I punch Mike in the nose, I'm not going to be protected just because I'm sitting at this table. If I bump into him by mistake, I'm protected because we're sitting at this table. But have your insurance company talk with you about that. They'll be happy to sell you an umbrella policy. You'll sleep well when you have it. It's a couple $1 million of coverage, and it's a couple $100 for insurance coverage.
Lee?
Doesn't the Maine Municipal Association cover us on most of this stuff?
For the negligence, if I bumped into Mike and he hurt his shoulder, the MMA would give me insurance to have that discussion.
Right.
It also covers us for decisions we make too.
Right.
I
We
think
can't get sued for decisions directly.
Unless they're grossly incompetent
Exactly.
or,
Right.
personally driven.
I think the safety committee's concerns was that, by and large, the committee is staffed by volunteers who are not overseers, and the degree to which they are responsible. So,
Which was precisely the reason we amended the bylaws to assure that an overseer was the chair, because the old version of the bylaws said we have to have a committee, didn't say who was in charge of it. So we tried to knit those activities together for the election.
I think that what may be advisable is for me in the next few weeks to put together some thoughts and circulate them to the overseers about possible ways in which this committee could be better structured to allow for better oversight of the individuals they're concerned with, as well as better security for the volunteers that they feel like they're not liable. I'll circulate those around before the January meeting. There is no December meeting, let's remember.
Can those suggestions go to the people that are currently on the committee also? Is that appropriate?
Well, I would actually solicit the ideas from the committee to start with. they're the ones who are
Right.
driving this train, so.
They're the ones who know best how hard they work. too.
Exactly,
Right,
so
exactly.
I'd rather
Yeah,
hear
we've got
from
the
you,
insight.
I'd rather hear immediately from them and
Okay.
then turn that into something for the overseers. Make sense? Clicking them off here, folks. Last item is that, and I have made a mistake here and overstepped my bounds, and I apologize for that. It's inappropriate. But we do have an opening on the board, and there, in the bylaws, copy of which I have, I know Judy always has them right in front of her. Here are mine. Bylaws states that give me a second. In the event of the death or resignation of any officer or overseer, that place may be filled by a vote of the majority of the Board of Overseers, and the new officer or overseer so elected shall hold that office until the next annual meeting or until a successor is elected and qualified. We are currently at 6 overseers with the resignation of Wendy Huntoon. For a variety of reasons, which I trust are obvious, I think it's advisable for us to try to fill that seat. We have the majority of the year still in front of us. She was serving a 1-year term. Remember, the annual meeting, we had people, she was serving a 1 year, so her term actually goes only until the annual meeting. Through Vicky, I learned of an individual who would be willing to be nominated, and that individual is Jeffrey Wilt, who's here today. I guess I haven't conducted this particular process since I've been president, but I guess what I really should ask is, are there nominations for any other individuals to serve that role?
Well,
Judy?
I think that, again, with the luxury of time, that we have December to think about it, I think we should be soliciting from the community in the same way the nominating committee solicits from the community people. The problem with Wendy resigning is not just the Sundays here. We've already had a conversation about her loss in the context of safety, but for the utilities trustees, it creates a couple dominoes that are falling as well. You'll recall that the utility trustees has to have 3 overseers. She was the 3rd of those overseers, so now we have to get an overseer who would be willing to serve on that, or we need to, and Wendy has said, I believe, did Wendy say that she would stay on as a lay member?
She said she would. She said she couldn't guarantee that she would be here every whatever
So she couldn't
Friday,
count towards the
but
quorum.
that she had that interest and was willing to do that.
So if we could keep her engaged in this community in some fashion as a lay member, then the new trustee, the new overseer here doesn't have to fill that role, we could flip it. So those things that we have to think about. As from my perspective, when he provided the utility trustees extraordinary service in terms of her great talent on financial review and just logic. She's just a smart, engaging, usually non-emotional person. And I'd hate to lose her for this village altogether, but anybody we appoint here, we do have to consider its impact on the utilities. If that person wants to serve as the overseer member, that's great, because we have Wendy as a lay member. If that person doesn't want to be the utility trustee, overseer, then we've got another hole to fill. I think we should be asking community members. I'm so grateful that Jeffrey is willing to step up, and I know that he has the capacity to come because he lives here, or at least is living with 2 feet in 2 different places. But I think we need to talk that through.
Other overseers?
I think if it was a 3-year term, that would be more of an issue. I mean, it is a short term, so we should consider that too, that it might make sense to just, well, you lose a couple of months of people being involved in the discussion, that's from there to August, that's like a quarter of the time already that we would lose. But we're not going to do that much this month coming up anyway.
Well, except
The
for
operative
personnel.
word in the bylaws is may fill that spot. It isn't shall. You don't have to fill that spot. I'd be willing to go along with 6. You've got 6 people who know each other, who work together. And again, it's still August.
That's an option too.
That still doesn't solve our problem on the utility trustees, because we still need someone from this table to add to their plate.
Right.
It also makes making the quorum that much harder, and we failed our community in September when we didn't have a quorum.
Right.
Yes, excuse me, I have to say that we were unable to have a quorum. By the way, I think for the first time since I've been around this table in several years, and that was in September. I understand all the pressures on everybody around this table to be here. We all have different reasons for not being able. We have to have a quorum physically present here, not on the phone, to have a meeting. And we were not able to do that in September. And with 6 people around the table, we run a greater risk of that not happening in the next 6 or 7 months. First, Mike.
Question about that. Is that some sort of state law that you have to be here, or is that just the way it's always been, or how does that work?
You respond and then Vicki.
Our bylaws say specifically,
Okay.
the public meeting laws say that you have to have a quorum. They're silent about how you measure it because of long distance, because the ordinary municipal organization doesn't have selectmen who travel. They live in the town they represent. We're unique.
Right.
So when we did the bylaws, when we amended them, we specifically addressed that issue. Quorum has to be physically present, but participation by phone is allowed, and that vote on the phone counts. We felt that was a good compromise, and that's what the community adopted. So yeah, we need 4 people here
Right.
for each meeting. Yeah, you say first time ever happened with you. It's the first time it ever happened with me that we didn't have a quorum. And so I think it is essential we have 7 people. I think we owe it to the community to assure that we're making sure that just like the nominating committee walks around, they don't. I don't mean this is an uncomfortable conversation. It sounds as though I'm saying I don't want Jeffrey. I want Jeffrey if he's the best we have, if we're considering the utilities impact as well.
Vicki?
I don't have a question, it's a statement. I see no reason to wait. I do not think we should settle for 6. I think we need 7. I think the more people in the community that are involved, it makes for a better community. I see no reason to hand-pick somebody who might be willing to be on the utilities. That's the next problem. The first problem is to fill the seat for the overseers. We all knew that Wendy resigned the day after she did it, okay? And I have another neighbor who would be willing also, and I brought these to Blair before the annual meeting. They were never considered because, to me, it appeared that an overseer had been hand-picked. So on several levels here, I think it is it's to fill out the end of a 1-year term if Mr. Wilk doesn't like being an overseer, because as we all know, it's pretty thankless and it's hard getting people here. When I was asked, I was told I was the 11th person asked to be an overseer. So some years, you know, that's a feast, and some years there's a famine. But I see no reason to wait. And if you don't want to elect an overseer today, don't vote for him.
Lee?
I see this as, I don't want to wait on having another overseer. And my reasoning is, whoever you have as a new overseer, you want to get him on here as soon as possible, because this is a learn-as-you-go job. If you're not here, you're not going to learn. And usually the first year, that was the reason we staggered the terms, because the first year the person's usually just watching what's going on and learning. And the second year they start participating more. So that's my position.
Judy?
Well, since we have the benefit of having Jeffrey here, let's ask him. Would you be willing to also be the overseer appointee to the utility board that involves a Friday afternoon meeting, as usually the same weekend as the what is this called, overseers meeting?
Well, I would say I'm not opposed to a Friday afternoon meeting. I probably want to have a little bit better understanding of what that particular board does.
Right. Well, we run the water and sewer departments with the incredible, with Dave
Well, you haven't.
Bill and Dick,
Yeah.
but it is.
I mean, I'm not opposed to a Friday meeting. The reality is, we live here and in Virginia, so I'm here virtually every weekend.
And does that include Friday
Yeah.
afternoons?
Yeah, I generally fly up Thursday after work.
Then that addresses my concern.
Mike?
For the utility committee meeting, is it the same bylaw issue that people have to be there?
The utility
What's the?
ordinance is silent as to
Okay,
that. What our practice has been is to assure we have a quorum, because quorum establishments only become an issue if you make a decision that someone is opposed to, and then they say that decision is no good because you didn't have a quorum. So we're very cautious about trying to assure we have a quorum.
Who else is on that?
I am, Judy.
David is the chair, Gordon, and us two. So the two lay members are there, and we need another person at this table. It's supposed to be 3 to 2.
And you would pick up a third lay person,
Well, we would have,
theoretically.
Wendy has said that she would agree to remain, to fill out, to flip her term to become the layperson. But she can't promise us she'll be there.
That would depend on either of those two deciding, you know, if you want to go,
This is one of those things like Jesus on the Mount of Olives saying, if someone would take this cup away. I really don't want, I've been an overseer, I did it for a long time. I really don't want to be an overseer. I'm quite happy in my role as the chairman of the Utilities Committee. In desperation, if there were no other option, I would step up to do that. That would leave an at-large position, which could be filled by someone.
And
And
Gordon is a retired DEP employee, and with Nordic Farms, we've been leaning on him a bit.
Likewise, I believe the first time that Jesus on the Mount of Olives has been mentioned while I've been around this table. Mike?
I talked to you about the Nordic Farm thing on the side prior to this, and I mean, I might be willing to do this. I'd have to get out of my tree stuff, I'm sorry.
Oh, my God.
I won't be able to do that, but I think because I have 25 years' experience designing wastewater plants.
We're making a left turn here that I'm not aware of what's going on.
He's saying he would be the utility trustee.
Yeah, so that those two could
So-
remain.
I hear you.
And
And
then
that
Jeff
would
could
allow
be
Jeff-
some,
That-
Jeff could work on the tree committee.
My
He lives in the woods.
primary concern,
I have a tree on my property.
excuse me, my primary concern is filling the vacancy in the Board of Overseers. There are two opinions about that, whether that occurs through the nomination process and voting here today, or whether that gets delayed until January
Yeah.
to allow time to solicit other names in the community. I tend to agree with Lee, which is that this is filling out a term, a one-year term.
Right.
There's essentially 7 or 8 months left of that term, and losing 2 months from now in January is, as he says, a quarter that, I would rather see someone, and someone good, in that chair than wait and go through this process in January. That's my opinion.
I move we elect an overseer, Jeffrey Will.
Is there a second to that?
My son.
Vicki? Any discussion?
yes.
Dick?
I do not like the way that Mr. Wilt was anointed through email, through your activities. And I think it's wrong. I think that we need to canvass the village to see who might want to volunteer. And I'm opposed.
I agree that I was perhaps pushing the process, Dick. I agree with that, and I apologize for that. Judy?
I don't want that brush to tar Mr. Wills. I'm very pleased that he has agreed to step up. I'm confident that he will be physically present because he said he would be. I know from the few times I've spoken with him that he's articulate and intelligent and thoughtful. I think we all learn when we get out ahead of ourselves, including me. But I don't want the decision today to be influenced by the fact that out of a desire to do what's right by the village, John got out ahead of himself.
Right.
Mike?
I agree that he did, but again, I So to me, I think if we were electing somebody for a 3-year term, I would be totally on board saying, let's wait and let's canvass everybody. Because we're talking about, now versus August, we're talking about 2/3 of a year already. So if we wait 2 or 3 months to do this, it seems it's almost like, if we think of it as a temporary appointment, I think it makes sense.
Right, and that's why I'm gonna vote for the motion.
Yeah.
Precisely.
Yeah, and I understand exactly what you're saying, Brock, and I think we all learned here, in the future, what we would do differently is that as soon as we got the resignation from Wendy, we would have talked to Dan Webster, he would have sent out an email, we would have posted it and so on.
Well, what we would have done is schedule a special meeting of the overseers so the overseers could decide together what to do. Decisions are made by the 7 people at the table.
Right. but-
They're managed by the president.
Right, but you understand what I'm saying. I'm saying we would have done a broadcast type thing. And I think that we would do that moving forward, and I think that's the goal. But we are where we are, and again, because of the 1-year term thing, I think that's...
Judy?
I also think that if the motion passes, that the decision as to utility trustees, we don't meet again until January as well. And the way that the bylaws are set, the ordinance or whatever it's called is set up there, a recommendation is made to the overseers. So that whole, how we're going to deal with the Wendy hole up there, can be addressed in July and January.
So, all right, we'll ask that question then. Stay with what we're talking about.
Further discussion on this? All in favor? Opposed? That's 4-1, passes. Welcome, Mr. Will.
Then he would need to be sworn in by Beanie.
Beanie, who's
Not
not here, but we have an associate clerk in the, I don't know where I'm looking over in this direction. We have an associate clerk in the village
Yeah,
who is
Carlton.
here. Carlton.
Is Beanie's around?
I thought she's already gone. No, she's
Oh.
gone. She's gone. So,
Off to Florida.
Jeffrey, I'll...
You want to fly down and get...
Right.
Plans went.
Has Carlton signed anyone in,
No.
sworn in?
No, but Beanie can point her in the right direction, right, Blair?
I will talk to them and make that happen. Thank you. And I don't know if Mr. Will is to assume a chair now or...
No, not until he's sworn in.
Not till he's sworn in. Although Mr. Houghton was assuming a chair when he had not been sworn in.
No,
He did? You waited? All right.
I got sworn in.
Lastly, and I apologize for taking so long this time around.
I was just going to speak on behalf of the Utilities Committee. Again, you've got a long period of time between now and January. There is a learning curve to the Utilities Committee the way there is a learning curve to the Board of Overseers. And I would be happy to make myself available on the weekends to Mr. Wilson if he has that interest in bridging that gap in the learning curve.
That's good.
Well, we have a couple people that expressed an interest in it.
Right, I think this is for the Utilities Committee to figure out first in terms of who they'd be interested in talking to. I'm not sure where that ended up.
We can talk about it.
And lastly, I just do want to publicly state that, along with what Judy said about Wendy's contributions to the Utilities Committee, Wendy was a fabulous overseer, and I deeply regret her not being around this table. I know this was challenging for her, and she found it to be exasperating at times because we were not operating in the ways that other organizations that she was familiar with had operated. But she brought a lot, as every overseer does, to these conversations. I have not yet been in a situation here where I haven't been grateful for people who sit around this table, each of whom brings unique talents and skills. So I very much publicly want to say how grateful I am that she served with us. That's all I have to say as president. Report to the treasurer is next.
Well, good morning, everyone. So when we get to this time of year, we've really done most of what we're going to do from a financial perspective, which is good news. So we've got 10 months of actual spending in financial statements. There's one copy at the end of the table. It is rare in my experience we have this kind of attendance in November. And I'm thrilled that you're all here. It's kind of nice for a change. But as a general statement, when you look at individual budget lines, we're overspent on some, we're underspent on others, but the net is not bad at all. So we put together an estimated variance to budget report. And what that really does is looks at places where we're spending more than we expected or less. And we always have a contingency fund that we use to cover those things that you just didn't budget for. You want to do some tree work that pops up, lots of different things fall into that category. So I've been doing this as I've been an overseer or treasurer for about 10 years, and I have never seen the magnitude of project work we have done this past year. And just to give you an idea, our contingency fund, which is typically what we do for these things, is usually around $20,000 a year. Well, this year we had $22,000 in contingency and an additional $54,000 in funds that the voters approved to carry over to do a whole host of other projects. And just, you've seen a bunch of them. There's a bunch of roads. We rebuilt 3 roads. The community hall windows were redone. The entire community hall has been rewired. We did $15,000 worth of engineering as pre-work for the seawall. That is an absolutely amazing accomplishment, and the overseers, and Bill in particular, we almost killed him, but deserve some credit for really pulling that all together and getting it done. And the summary of the variance to budget is, when we get done, we're about $41,000 overspent to the budget. And for clarification, contingency funds go into the budget, but those approved funds that we can use for reserves do not. So that gave us $54,000 plus or minus left over. And we still have some outstanding spending. I expect bills in the amount of about $8,000 for tree work and our wharf in and out kind of stuff that we do every year to come in before year end. That leaves us with about $5,400 in cash. So the good news is it looks like we'll finish this year within budget. And given the moving pieces, if any of you attended most of these meetings and seen the deliberations about what do we put off, can we move forward with this project, what can we do to cut costs out of it, it has been a real challenging year to make all that happen. So. And particularly Bill, I mean, the guy, what haven't you done this year? You haven't rested? And to hold that all together in a volunteer organization where there is very little direct oversight on a day-to-day basis other than Bill is pretty remarkable. So other business, we're going to receive our $25,000 payment from the town of Northport. They rebate us $25,000 in taxes that we pay to the town, recognizing that residents of the town of Northport enjoy Bayside a great deal as well. Overdue tax balances, the summary is we're at $14,952 for 2018. That compares to the same time frame last year of $19,259. So those are pretty much historical lows for taxes that have not yet been paid. John talked about Janine Tucker. Personal note, she's been an absolutely fabulous resource for me. She helped us through a couple of very difficult things. We had a tax system that allowed exemptions to village residents that really shouldn't have been allowed. And it was a function of the kind of software that was being used and the approach that had been taken for quite some time. So she helped us work through that. It did end up with an increase in the expense of tax collection, but those exemptions have gone away, so that's all good news. And then the move to a new tax year. So you remember we used to pay our taxes late in the year and use our reserves to fund village operations. We are able now to use about half the amount of reserves to run the village and to collect taxes. And what that really does is makes it possible to use reserves for projects within the village. So we don't have to build as much of a buffer. We can use the funds that are coming in from tax. And it's a really positive thing for all of us, I think. And I thank John for the recognition from the overseers. I think she deserves it. And lastly, our annual audit is scheduled for the 11th and 12th of February. So, any questions I can answer?
Overseers, Judy?
It's a pipe dream, but of the 5,400 remaining, we had what do we call it, the prophylactic work, I can't think what the right word is, for the wharf that we weren't able to schedule with Proc. Should we look to, I mean, we've had storms, it's not a good time to get out there, but if we have 5,400 to do what we put off to next year?
Yeah, so there was an article approved at the annual meeting allowing us to use funds to complete the work that we did not get done. The assumption was we might carry some funds over because there were so many projects, we weren't sure we could get them all done. If we finish the year with a positive balance, I would say that's a yes, that could be used and rolled into next year. But you got to kind of keep in mind, I don't know when the last time any of you remember a pre-Thanksgiving snowstorm, but it's been quite a while. So our winter road budget is probably going to get hit more. Bill continues to work on projects, and whereas for most of the year, he runs about 40 hours a week, he's been running on average about 50 hours a week for some time now. So we're still spending some money that I really haven't accounted for, because I can't, my crystal ball is too cloudy to do that.
Mike?
Also, when we're doing the proactive work on the wharf, it's all about, a big chunk of the cost is mobilization. So having them mobilize special for this would, now, if we can carry it over, and we could say, we have an extra amount next year when they come and mobilize anyway, I think that would be best, Bill, right? Yeah, so we'd end up doing more of it than next year with the remaining budget. Does that work, Treasurer?
Well, yeah, it does. From a financial standpoint, what I would also say is, even if we wanted to mobilize, even if the weather was favorable, I would not recommend that, because that right now is an estimate.
Right.
We may be at absolute zero, we may be behind the eight ball, so.
Yeah.
You've heard me mention a number of times, I love to have about a $5,000 cushion for those things that you just don't know about. We may end the year $10,000 to the good. I just don't know. My guess is we're gonna end up very close to budget by the time we're done.
And especially since we have a way to carry it over this particular year, it makes sense.
Nothing lost. Get avoided, and the wharf's in good shape.
Right.
We did our regular maintenance. We just didn't do the additional maintenance that the infrastructure committee had hoped to do.
Right.
Lee?
Why don't we just leave the cushion that we have and don't do any more?
Right.
Because you don't know what storms we're gonna have, you don't know what problems we're gonna have on the roads. There's too many things that can, and I'm not in favor of spending down to zero, period.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Anything else for the treasurer?
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Report of the village agent, sir.
I think we're in pretty good shape.
Well,
Hopefully I can start to relax if we don't get a lot of snowstorms. The one thing that we forgot to do last month with everything that was going on, we forgot to get the winter parking ban put into effect. It normally goes into effect November 15th. We need to get that advertised in the paper, and we need to get that in place. See, we've already had a storm, a couple more in the future right off.
mhm.
So we need a motion.
I'll make that motion.
Tell me if I need a motion. It's every year we've done it historically, it's just it's a matter of,
To post the ban, you
Oh, to post the ban.
need municipal action.
Right.
So the
I
municipal action is the
motion
motion.
Mike?
that we post the ban.
second. Lee? Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Just,
It's unanimous.
we're just gonna make sure it's the one that says during storms.
Yeah, I wanted to clarify what it said.
It's a document that, we clarified the language last year, I believe.
Yeah, it's the same one as last year's, the
Right.
point of it. Okay, Amy?
Don't pull up the old one.
Right.
Other than that, I can't, they're supposed to be done upstairs with electrical work, with the exception of the wire that they did not run up to the top because of the panels being in the way, and they didn't want to take them apart. John Woolsey's been here since they finished, now he's moved the two panels. I'm gonna see if I can call them back and see if they can come back and put that up there. Now that the two panels are out of the way. Everything looks pretty good upstairs there. I think they've done a relatively good job for us in a timely manner. There will be a little extra cleaning in the spring, just because of all the drilling and they're not very good cleaners. So there will be a little extra.
Wouldn't expect it.
Extra on that in the spring. And I believe our road stuff that we had in the thing is all finished, that we had budgeted and scheduled to do. Everything looks good. I got a few little spots I gotta watch. We got one, we're still gonna have to deal with the corner of George and Maple Street.
Right, I wanted to just point out that during that last storm, when we had all that rain and everything, it looked great
It worked
on George
great.
Street. So it's working great. The only issue is somebody who parks in the right of way, how we can work with them to park. So there's no infrastructure issue there. It works great.
This is Georgia Maple, Upper Georgia Maple?
Yes.
Yeah, that worked excellent.
Lee?
Great.
in a few years, should we go over and paint where the places where the water goes, so that when they're snow plowing, they need to dig out, they'll know where those
The storm drains.
storm drains are?
Is that a town of Northport issue, or?
No, we
We spray painted them.
spray painted.
We spray painted them a couple of years, the town spray painted them a couple of years. I believe last year when I had the conversation with Northport Road Commissioner who does the work, he knows where they are. You know, he knows right where they are, so he doesn't really need it painted up.
Does this hired man know where they are?
Well, he's the hired man. He's the one that does it. Because he runs the skid steer. Because I did have that discussion with him last year on that. So, I mean, we can still do it if you want to, but he seems to think that we don't need to because he knows right where they are because he's done it.
I think when you get a lot of snow and it gets icy, and it snows blowing like a son of a gun, you may not know exactly where it is. So I think it'd be a good idea to paint them.
You may not know where you are.
Yeah, you may not know where you are.
You are here.
Is that an issue, Bill? Is it?
No, it can be done. It's just the thing to do it. And the one thing for Steve is, I've been trying to get that catch basin clean out built to us from the town. For some reason, it just takes forever. And always seems so they dump it in the next year.
So that's about $2,000, right?
I think so, yeah.
I'll accrue a couple $1,000 if the bill doesn't come in.
Yeah.
And can you chase Scott down and see if we can get a final bill from Mike?
Yeah, okay. I think he's gone.
Vicki?
I just wondered, did we sell the old police car? It was, apparently there were two people that were interested.
Yeah, well, I haven't had a chance to even worry about getting that car decommissioned yet.
Oh, okay, fine, just,
There's too much on my plate.
We have to take a bunch of stuff off of it.
oh, okay, yeah.
But there are people waiting in line evidently to purchase
There
it.
was-
It's lovely.
The last time I contacted them, two people.
You know what?
Excellent, excellent.
Police want to be responsible.
Any other questions for Bill?
Good job, Billy.
Thank you, Bill, for everything. This has been, I will echo what Steve said, by the way, which is that we have moved through a year where we have taken on a huge number of projects successfully and completed them. And especially those roads, I remember last year proposing this series of roads, and I thought, we're going to be able to take all that on, and we have. And thank you, Bill, and thank you to everyone involved. It's incredible what we've done. How much has occurred by acting proactively?
And it worked.
Unfortunately, now we have another list.
The list will always continue. Report of the office manager, Amy?
So I actually am in the process of doing utility bills, so look for them soon. I did, Vicki had asked last month for me to do a recap of the community hall and what occurred this past summer. I have it all down there. Basically, what it boils down to is that we had income of $795 all total, which is approximately about $100 more than last year. There were 19 times I have down here that the community hall was used in July, and 42 times that the community hall was used in August. Those 2 months are the two primary months that the community hall is used a lot. We did have yoga, dance, Bayside Arts had events going, reunions, pancake breakfast, geokinesis, which is another form, I don't want to say yoga because it's not really yoga, I don't believe.
Just go to classes and
Which
you'll
is
learn.
other meetings that I throw it as well. We are on the winter hours, and with the holiday season coming up, of course, I'm going to be a lot more helping out with the post office, so apologies go ahead of time if the hours need to change. But this coming week, I will let you know, Friday I have to work for my regular at the post office, so I won't be here on Friday. So I'm going to be moving those hours to Tuesday and Wednesday. where
So you're here,
Thursday, we're not here as well. Because of the holidays.
but you're here this week, Tuesday and Wednesday.
Tuesday and Wednesday, yeah, I will be here.
Is it possible to isolate costs for the community hall to contrast to the $795 in revenue? In other words, can we say that in the course of a year, we spend X to accommodate these events?
We don't track that today. I mean, we'd have to just say how much time does anybody spend for an hour basis. In the process, there's nothing within the financial reporting systems that would help you with that.
Okay.
I mean, cleaning, you can assume the cleaning's a part in there. Power,
Yeah,
we don't have
usually
any
it's
way
the
to
first
allocate
thing in the
power.
spring. And then the people that use the community hall also clean up after themselves too.
Thank you.
I just want to say that a couple of years ago, I don't know how long, I've only been doing this a couple of years, but I did gather information from the previous years, and really, during the month of July, August, the community hall was used maybe 15 times, and those were classes. So I think it's just wonderful that the community is using the community hall, and we've invested certainly a lot of money to preserve it, but I just think it's wonderful, and Amy does keep track of that. I've not heard of any conflicts. We haven't had any problems in the last 2 years as far as complaints from the classes and stuff, so I do, want to just acknowledge that it's working like a fine machine. A fine ballet.
Well, it's a good example of when you and Amy pay attention to what needs to be done, it gets done
But we-
properly. And
Well, we
so you
took a
did
little
great
look
job.
at it, but yeah, and Amy, so thank you.
Anything else, Amy?
No, just thank you whoever brought in food, because I'm so hoping to have the principal do the polar dip, so.
So just a reminder about the food that's outside. What's the deadline for how long people can bring food here?
Well, actually, they're doing the count tomorrow, on the Monday, so.
You gotta go to Hannaford tomorrow.
So between now and tomorrow, there's still an opportunity to bring food
Yeah.
up.
Where are they getting the pig? Where are they getting
Bring
the
them
pig?
bring it to the school.
Where are they just kissing?
I do have one comment, if I may. So a comment about office hours. We have ended up saving a significant amount of money over the past 2 years since Amy joined us for a variety of reasons. One of them is her flexibility in changing office hours. We used to staff the office for a long period of time just to make sure we could keep Paul employed. And with Amy's job at the post office, which is actually a better deal for her than being with us, she has a flexibility to go there and work when they need her and still be available for us. She does backflips to change her personal schedule around in life to be able to come in here and get utility bills out and do the things we need to do. So the positive trade-off is we spend less money in that area today than we used to, which tells you we really didn't need to, other than that's what it took to keep the office staffed. And that the second piece is that the organization level we have for the things we do today is better than it's ever been. And I think the last piece is there's undeniably a inconvenience to the residents of the village. We used to have far more hours where somebody could just wander in, but even now with Amy, there are hours she sits here and nobody comes to visit. So I think it was a good decision for the village.
And as I recall, we tracked complaints, as it were, from people about, and there are very few in the course of the summer, or fall too. So I think that we're able to manage this. Any other, Mike?
The Bayside Arts, I know some of us paid $90 this year, and, we still have panels up in our community hall from that, and I'm just wondering when's the right time to talk about some of that stuff.
You know what, I think maybe a good time would be when they come to present what they want to do next year, because I thought we had covered it this year, but apparently it didn't take, so maybe when they present their schedule for next year, we revisit that.
Well,
In there, sorry.
I agree that that's a conversation, but I also think that this money is a reflection of adherence to what we had asked of them, other than the stage area. And we also talked about that, about how we're going to deal with that.
Right.
I think we talked about a flag, at least muted that look.
Yeah, I don't think we ever resolved the stuff upstairs. Maybe that's the one topic we should talk about, what we want out of that prior to next season before they come to talk to us, because I personally, and
Can we put it on the agenda for January? To talk about it then?
Okay. We can stop talking about it right now. Okay.
Stay on topic?
Well, we are on topic. It's more the community hall rehab. item.
Keep going, Mike. I don't want you to feel silenced.
No, I'll make it real quickly. Basically, I think what we need to do is we need to, in January, okay, try to come up with when we realistically want things up and down in the community hall to balance between what they're doing and what everybody else is doing. So we just need to talk about that. Okay?
And we're speaking, I assume, in terms of their physical infrastructure, the panels that are on stage and that sort of stuff.
I think that stuff and other things that they want, like lights and things that aren't even there yet, but they want to get. So, we kind of have to have a plan of what we want so that when we hear their plan, we can kind of mesh them together and everybody can coexist.
All right, I'll put it on the January agenda. Anything else for Amy? We'll then move to committee reports, and Vicki asked if she could move to the front of the list, and you are, in terms of tree planting / tree warden, Vicki Matt.
Not too much. So this is tree warden. I sent a letter to the Smiths who had the tree that they wanted taken down, but it's healthy. But somebody should have a copy of this. I told them what we had decided, that if they wanted to take the tree down at their own expense, it was approved by the overseers. I put in a deadline of 1 year to do that, if they wanted to do it, to let me know. I haven't heard anything, but I do think in case they contact the village office, or, somebody should be aware that they did receive this letter. So I'm not sure. Can I give it to you or give it to Amy?
Yeah, let me take a look at it, and I'll
Yeah.
pass it on to Amy.
I also brought we got a quote for $5,100 from Goodrich and Lerman Tree Service to take trees down. I had decided that the tree at the museum didn't need to be taken down because it didn't present a hazard, and Mother Nature took it down a couple weeks ago. So I contacted the museum people, the Historical Society, and they said, you can take a copy of this, they said this is just their quote, they were happy with the tree there, they wanted to leave it as it was so that the birds could feed on the insects. And I said, fine, if you change your mind, just let me know and we'll take care of the taking down trees. They have taken down the tree in Cradle Road, and the other two are pending. So that's that. Okay?
I have
Informed?
one question. I noticed on here it says that eventual planting a replacement tree in a different location. Isn't our saying it has to be in the same location right now?
Well,
Do you suspend that, or?
Well, we're working on the tree ordinance to change that, but it wouldn't be in exactly the same location if it presented a hazard. So it has to be sort of nearby is what the current ordinance
Okay,
says.
okay, so this satisfies that, that sounds right.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, great.
And hopefully by the time anything is done, we'll have updated the tree ordinance.
Which would be
Okay.
great.
So the only other thing, as far as the tree committee, I just wanted to show you the one fun thing that we did was T-shirts. And so you have to stand up and show this. Okay, so Betty Woolsey, do you recognize this tree?
Inside the tree squad.
What I call a gal's tree, because it's a gal's bench.
That's it, yeah, okay, so Betty Woolsey
Oh,
sketched
lovely.
the tree in Ruggles Park.
Show it to our
Oh,
audience.
sorry, okay.
And the camera.
Bayside Tree Squad, believe it or not, the Woolsey's grandson came up with the name. Wasn't my first choice, but we took a vote, and everybody liked Bayside Tree Squad. So, this is what we have. Hopefully, my thought is in conjunction with the 4th of July celebration, we might do a little Arbor Day celebration, even though Arbor Day is in April, but nobody's here in April. The thought was to maybe try to sell some of them, but I do have gifts for you all today. Okay?
I would pay for it. I think that's fabulous, actually.
Oh,
I really do.
Well, congrats. Well, let's see, Betty did it, and then John Steve did. But anyway, yeah, they did a great job. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to write one. All right.
And quick question, the two trees that are left here, the double trunked oak and the ash tree, both in Baby Park and Pleasant Lane. The $3,500 there, that $3,500 is already spoken for in our budget, is that correct?
Yes, it's,
We think we're okay.
Okay. I'll take that as a sufficient answer, thank you.
His blood pressure goes up a little bit as he commits that, but yes.
no,
No, we went over that a number of months.
I
Right,
thought so, I just wanted,
Yeah.
we didn't name the trees. that's
we
all.
tried, yeah.
Then it was general trees, now it's specific trees.
I
that's why.
should have started with that. As of the 1st of October, with a conversation with Steve, we had $5,400. And so when we got this was fine, this is under $5,400. We took out the museum tree, so now it's down to 45, so we basically have 900 left over. And there's nothing else on the books unless Mother Nature, does something to one of our trees. And the really expensive piece here is just that pruning, and underneath it's a huge tree, and there are wires all around it. So God love the men who are going to take that on. So.
Thank you. Any questions for our interim tree warden?
Great job.
Communications committee.
Two things to get your guidance on. One is to reinforce that we are having another, I think this is our third public meeting on the Scrivener's errors corrections on the voting, on the zoning ordinance today at the conclusion of this meeting, or at 11:30, if it comes sooner. Because although we had several public meetings, I failed to read the statute and confirm that we also needed to put it in the Republican Journal. So we put it in the Republican Journal for this morning at 11:30. So you're all welcome to hang out here even longer. Nothing has changed since the last time we had a public hearing on this. It's just this time trying to do it right. The second thing is the Utilities Committee met on Friday, and they have asked the overseers to put out a statement about the Nordic Farms, that we are monitoring, that through the utilities trustees, we are monitoring the Nordic Farms, but soliciting input as well, letting the community members know that we're looking at it, not taking the responsibility for parroting their personal concerns, but letting them know. And so I was looking for your guidance to allow me to put together through Danny a notice saying, hey, Nordic Farms, well, we are watching it. This is what the utility trustees are doing. You have a responsibility to take care of your own concerns. We aren't adopting anybody's point of view. But if you have questions or concerns, please use us as a resource as well. Are you comfortable with me doing that?
I would note that you're referring to a letter coming out from the utility trustees, and there have been requests that the Board of Overseers somehow likewise either take a position and/or announce something in this regard. And that may or may not satisfy people who want to know what the Board of Overseers intends.
But what I'm talking about is not a letter coming out from us. I'm talking about a notice that if you have questions or concerns, contact us. We are a resource. We are keeping track of it.
Understood.
We aren't stating a position in it.
Thank you. Mike?
As to try to keep up on it, and I've been talking to some of the people at DEP, and there is a permit in now, and it hasn't been approved yet as being substantially complete yet. So there really is nothing to comment on yet anyway, or take a stand on. Everything is hypothetical at this point.
I understand. I'm merely
Yeah.
noting that there is
Yeah.
some subtle pressure being applied upon at least me, if not this board. Lee?
I think this is a political, and I don't think we ought to make a stand politically.
No.
Period.
May I speak?
Please.
I'm not making any political stance. I want to be kept informed. I think that we, as the Utilities Committee, both from the standpoint of our getting our potable water from the Belfast Water District, and from the standpoint of their discharging into a bay into which we also discharge, and the fact that our wastewater license is written in such a way that if the quality of the bay becomes degraded, we may lose our wastewater license. Those give us standing and the right to comment. I think that the village similarly has standing and the right to be kept informed and to comment if they find something that they think has concerns of the village. So I recognize that there are people circulating letters that are, for many people, just informational, and for other people, strongly partisan one way or another. And I think his name is Greg Wood. I wrote to him and said, as the secretary or the chairman of the Utilities Committee, I want to be kept informed. So they send things to you. I think that they should also be sending a notice to the village. Okay, there's a permit that just went in, you have this long to comment about it, that the village should be a resource of something, that you get a copy of that so that people who have an interest can read it, and if they think there's an issue, that they recognize that there's a time tolling in which to make a comment.
Yeah, to echo that, I think, obviously in Belfast, it's become very polarized, to the point where people running for city council are being elected based on that one issue alone. What's that?
Or not.
We're not.
Right, and either way, right? And I don't think that that's at all what we're talking about here, what we're talking about. I think for us, it's we really need to figure out what the potential concerns are and then need to comment on that stuff. And I think that the utility committee is good to make recommendations to us.
I think the point of this, what I took away from this on Friday was that so that the utility trustees and the village doesn't get told that they weren't keeping their constituents advised, this notice is, hey, if you have questions, you can send them to us. We're not answering them in a particular way, we're not taking a stance, but as he said, Greg Wood, he's now on a mailing list, so now he gets something that he can see and say, okay, now's a reaction point.
I think from everybody's standpoint, what you want from the DEP is due diligence. And that, even the people who are wildly against it, sometimes a consultant who brings up a very valid point, and those valid points need to go to the DEP so that they get to think about them when they're, we want more information about this before we accept this license or this or that. But, the standards to which they're going to be held when they build it, what's going to become of it, if they ever stop doing it, all of those things I think are of interest to this community.
I understand. And so thank you for clarifying that, so that it's a notice you're sending out.
Well, I wanted the endorsement.
Right, but now I understand it, so that
Yeah.
my concerns are, I'll track them. Do you want to vote on this
I don't think
to
we need
approve
a
it, or
vote.
we just need an understanding that this is,
I'm happy to send a text ahead of time
I
to
would
make
like to see,
everybody
yeah.
feel comfortable, because that will also help me understand what we're articulating.
Okay. Yeah,
makes
that's
good
good.
sense. Thank you.
Okay.
Anything
So
else
that's it
from,
for
that was
communication.
I understand how that service lived in communications, that makes sense. Anything else in the communications committee? How about the finance?
No.
How about
Gonna make Jeffrey
just so the
sign it.
public understands, for a variety of reasons, Ms. Metcalf chairs several committees now, happened to come up in a row, I guess I could do this, it is alphabetical except for, and the governance committee.
Yeah, and so we're not voting on the what's it called, the zoning, because we have to have that public hearing that was in the Republican Journal. We will vote in January on those Scrivener's errors, and then we will then keep going on the larger visionary stuff that we've been talking about. Do you want to have architectural standards? Do you want to have different lot sizes? Do you want to have change?
Well, is there the potential that at the public meeting, there's sufficient concern about some of the zoning language that you would in fact need to re-scriven what you've worked on, that would in fact, those changes need to be brought to the overseers in January?
If there are further then if there's further changes that need to be made, then the governance committee would have to meet to talk about them, and then you may be looking at something that's slightly different. For instance, Barbara Ashe found another typo in it that we're going to fix.
Okay, that's all we're
Yeah.
focusing only on that type of
Right.
stuff, right? That's what you're talking about.
Right.
So you'll just keep me informed as to whether that's going to be a vote or a relook at things?
Yeah.
Thank you. Anything else in the governance committee?
No.
Infrastructure committee, Mr. Lanning?
Yes, roads, we talked about those, pretty much, we're all set there. We do have a list of a few new roads, Pleasant Street's one of them. There's two parts of that where it dumps into Broadway, and then more so down beyond that, which this is one of those, how are we gonna fix this one? It's a problem, and we're working on that, right, Billy?
Yeah.
So we'll come up with something on that, so that'll be part of next year's. We have looked at all the stuff that's been done, and it does look great. I do, again, kudos to Billy and so on for getting that done. As I mentioned, the community hall is pretty much done. Obviously, we have the last bills from back, and I do think we do need to talk about, I had it written down in January, the Bayside Arts and how that fits in with everything, and how we're going to use infrastructure in the community hall. The wharf is looking pretty good right now. I am looking forward to when we can get to that proactive stuff. There isn't really much new to talk about there, so let's just keep going. And then the dinghy dock issue is one that's sort of an infrastructure thing that I think I'd like to talk a little bit about. From my point of view, and I've been talking to, there's a committee of 3 from the Yacht Club, Billy and Craig, and I haven't talked to Gordon recently about it, but I talked to the other 2 the last few weeks, and it seems like the plan that's sort of materializing is sort of an education and an understanding initially, and then sort of a longer term infrastructure improvements of some kind that nobody really knows what it is going to be, and I think Gordon might be able to talk a little bit about the current proposal if we want to do that. But my thought is that it might be time for us to form a committee, and I know that we don't want to be committed to death, because John always points that out, and we don't need committee. But I think it does make sense, and it could be chaired by the governance committee or infrastructure, it doesn't really matter, but I think it ought to be a couple of overseers, a couple people from the yacht club. I'd love to get somebody on it who uses the beach, who isn't really involved in boating, because I think there's definitely some input there that people have come to me and said, I can't use the beach because all this stuff's there, and it's all about boating, and I just want to come out of my chair and sit here, and I'm not trying. It's like anecdotal, right? It's like I don't know how much that issue is for everybody, but I think we ought to have somebody who's going to voice that opinion on the committee, and then obviously we have an historical aspect to it too. So I'd love to see if we can have somebody involved in that. So that's kind of what I see as what we need to do, but and I don't know the real makeup of it, but I'd love to see us get started on that so that we can talk about it through,
Judy?
Wendy mentioned as part of her safety report last time that a letter was anticipated from the yacht club with those ideas. Has that letter been sent to the overseers? Has anyone seen it?
It was sent to Wendy, and it's my understanding that they forwarded a copy to you. I've discussed it, but I haven't seen it in its entirety yet. But I have discussed what Gordon could probably summarize it better than me. But the intent is that they would come up with a way to catalog the current dinghies and have a small fee for that, and possibly include the kayaks and so on in that, as more of a first year and education type program. And the idea would be everybody would understand what is supposed to happen. Again, a nominal fee to articulate that. It would be little stickers or something that would be sold by the office that would show that you have this quote little permit for it. And as we're gathering data on how many things are really out there, then we would talk about longer term strategies of what we really want to do in the long run.
Well, I think a place to start is exactly where Mike places it, is that it's a ad hoc conversation with recommendations to bring to the board. I think the constituents are the beach user, who is not a yacht club user, the yacht club, the wharf master, infrastructure because of the pressures, the torquing
Yeah.
that puts on the dock, and governance because it's rules. I think that a place to have that conversation start is that letter needs to be shared with the overseers, so the
Yes.
overseers can say that this makes sense, this doesn't make sense.
Right.
We have explored a fee system many, many years ago, and that, so I think there was some enthusiasm in the abstract for that, but there were some worries about the implementation of it. So I think we need to, I would be in support of an ad hoc committee along those lines, making a report to the overseers, but that letter should be distributed to the overseers.
Oh,
It
yes.
was intended for them.
Yeah, I mean, I just think we've come a long way from where we were, like, well, it's the overseer's problem, it's the outcomes
Yeah.
problem, and I think everybody realizes that it's, it really is an overseer's issue, but the number one user of the dinghy part is the yacht club, and then the number one user of the beach might not be the yacht club, and so we've got to get sort of all these people together to talk about it.
Just so everyone understands, that there was several things happened around the same time, which is that the letter was sent, the person to whom it was sent then resigned from the overseers. The letter was passed along to me. I'm, of course, happy to pass it along. It was not sent to me in the first place, so that's the reason I haven't yet. But I'm perfectly fine with having an ad hoc committee created. I think that, Mike, you seem to be the driving force behind this, so I would leave it to you to think about the composition of this, and perhaps between now and January, muster the forces such that in January you can make a full recommendation and you have a sense proceed, and I'll, of course, forward the letter along. I'll forward it along to all the overseers, happy to,
Yeah, I think it's,
We'll move on from
that's
there.
great, that's great, because I don't want to see, if we're talking about the safety committee sort of slowing down for a bit, that we lose sight of this, because there's still a lot that can be done this year prior to the next season. So that's great. I think that would be great. And then we can talk about what we think about that. So if anybody has recommendations for the beach person.
well, I saw a hand from Gordon way over here. Gordon, something, comment?
I'll keep it brief. Nailed it pretty much. I was going to sit here till the end and request a status on the letter that we did send to the safety committee. So you do have that, because we are hopeful that we'll get a response to that letter long before April. And it sounds like we're heading in that direction. I just want to also remind, on the first letter, we had a citizen who sent a letter to the overseers, I believe, it says that on mine. Alice Meter sent a letter about a related issue, the problem of the dinghy dock being unsafe, and she was somebody who fell in this year, but she sent a letter, so it's not, this issue is not just being driven by the yacht club, it's by some of the local citizens as well. I have a copy of that I'm glad to share with you if nobody is really aware of it. It did say overseers in the yacht club, and she certainly is going to be expecting some kind of a response, and there are plenty of others out there. But what you just talked about sounds like a good direction to go.
For those who are watching on video, I think it's important to note that I think this dinghy issue, which has been talked about since I've been an overseer and then president, has moved from a convenience, difficulty issue to a safety issue. And that's frankly what's brought it to the fore, is that it's more than a matter of, gee, I wish there were fewer dinghies around. It's taken on new significance. Mike, I'll follow up with you on that, and I will circulate the letter around.
And if there's in Alice's letter, if
I don't know
Amy, if you have an email
possesses
or
that.
something from Alice, we'd like to see it.
I don't think I've seen that
I
either.
don't think I've seen it.
Anything else from
Yeah,
infrastructure?
two more.
Go right ahead.
The wharf, the rebuilding of the wharf, we were charged with going back and looking at,
You mean the wall?
the wall of the wharf. It connects to the wharf. The wall, let's call it the seawall. Okay?
Seawall.
Seawall wharf. What's that?
Okay, Mr. Trump.
Well,
Well,
I do deserve that.
that was something.
That was a low blow.
Man, talk about no politics here, but okay. Mike, continue.
All right. Thanks, Billy. So the seawall, just to make sure I got it right.
There you go.
The seawall, we looked at, the goal was to look at rebuilding it in kind. And we did talk to Proc Marine about that, and I actually solicited a quote from them regarding that. And they actually preferred not to give us a quote, but just to review it for us, which was kind of nice. And they looked at it and they wanted to do it more informally because they felt that it might influence whether they could bid on it or not down the road, was their thought. And they didn't want to be excluded by offering, costs and so on. But the main thing that came out of that was that the all of the sort of vertical wall recommendations should have a cofferdam in that as part of the solution. Okay, and the reason for that is because essentially if we were to put out a bid package that says that we're not going to use the cofferdam and you need to worry about when there's going to be storms and build it in sections so that there aren't storms and all that stuff, and put the onus on the constructor. The problem with that is if we do have a storm out of the northeast and it hits it and it washes it away, we could claim that they're responsible, but we have to fix it immediately. So we'd have to go out there and fix it. And then we would only be able to fix it to whatever the Army Corps decides we can fix it. So their recommendation was that if any of those vertical wall options, that you would need a cofferdam. And based on that, Brock and I were talking. You want to jump in? Go ahead.
I don't know what a cofferdam is.
Okay.
Start with baby steps.
Barrier driven by.
Yeah.
Okay.
Think of it
It's what
as
we have
a
right
sheet
now.
metal driven in.
Yeah.
Right,
Okay.
that would prevent a storm from crashing into our wall.
Okay.
And because it's direct exposure of where it is, if we had a storm in the wrong direction, it could come in and sort of in between the wall and the ramp, and sort of rip out a lot of the land in that case. Whether it's needed or not it's very unlikely that would happen, but if it were to happen, we would be in trouble. The other part of the wharf issue is, and Billy and I have been looking at it, is we have some buckling down near the ramp right now, and we're hoping that it holds out for this season. That would be another reason we'd have to sort of come in and do that. So where we went with this to Proc was we want to find out if the replacement in kind would be a good alternative. And when you look at the cost of the cofferdam, and then you look at the life cycle of a replacement in kind, to me, and to some of the other people on the committee, it doesn't make sense. And I'm not sure we have 100% feeling on that. I mean, I know we still have Paul Myron from before, who's still very much in favor of that, and Lee is too. But to me, it doesn't make sense because you're going to build something that's going to last 30 to 50 years, and it's going to cost a lot to put in the cofferdam if we were going to do it that way. So that said, right, I have talked to the engineering folks, and we are considering a second alternative to move forward with in the design, if we can get it done for the same price. They were supposed to get it to me before this meeting. They will get it by the next one, for sure now, because we have 2 months. But the idea is that we would go back and look at the granite wall option, which would be more expensive. But when you start looking at the price of a cofferdam, and then the granite wall, and then the fact that it would last for generations, maybe that's the way to keep the discussion going, to get us to the design of the revetment and this other end. And if we wanted to go back to the in-kind, it would be a morph of these. The key is that we do have to do for a vertical wall, we have to do some geotech work. And the way I'm trying to break that out is doing some initial geotech in order to get a real, honest-to-goodness cost. Okay? It might not be enough to actually determine how much we have to build the sub-base yet, but that cost to do that part would be part of the whole cost of going with that option. So, although it requires us to take somewhat of a step back because we have voted on the revetment as the preferred alternative, I would like us to consider the possibility of revetment and a vertical wall, the granite wall, as an option. and take that forward, and even if we took it to the meeting next year and had people decide. The reason I say that is because I didn't solicit any of this feedback, but I've gotten a lot of feedback. And again, it's anecdotal because only the people I talk to I hear from, right? So I don't really know what everybody's opinion is. But there is quite a bit of opinion that says we want a vertical wall. It is the way it is. And so this way, we could at least have those two designs, and we could go to the meeting with that. And I can pretty much guarantee that if we did that, we could come up with an in-kind alternative too in the middle, if we really wanted to.
Excuse me, Lee?
Yeah.
If you go to a granite wall, I think we could get seconds from wall
Okay.
I would be in favor of granite wall. I'm not in favor of this rubble type thing because you're going to have another wall behind it up in the park, and you're going to lose your beach. Nobody's even talked about that. You know, the day that Paul and I and several others were down there, and I watched. There were kids down there playing on the beach, and there was several people, you know, swimming. And
yeah, and the revetment is a double-edged sword because the revetment will over time.
You'll lose your beach.
Well, over time, we will have the beach move up into the revetment, which will make it more stable, which would be great, but we would lose some of the beach in that process. Right? So
you're going to make an awful lot of people very angry.
Well, no matter what we do, that may occur. Judy?
We'll leave the beach.
So this proc review that you've just talked about, is that the peer review that we talked about since August?
yes, that's what
So they were the peer?
Yeah.
Okay. And so they have said to replace in kind, which is the timber wall, you have a cofferdam, and he's just written a note, $100,000.
Exactly.
Okay, and that's high for cofferdam, cofferdam.
Well, that's a temporary wall that goes in while you're building behind it,
I see.
and then you pull that out. So that's $100,000 that we don't get back.
Right, I see.
The revetment, because of the way you can build it as you go, and you would take it down and build it as you go, so you would have the ability to foresee 3 or 4 days worth of bad storms and get something in place. So that's,
And the revetment that we have approved, but it's always smart to not stick with what you approved just because you approved it. I love that we'll be thinking this. Has a very negative consequence, namely the loss of the parking, because you're digging way up into the area, and then we have to reallocate parking, and those costs haven't even been thought of yet.
okay, I'd like to talk to the camera now.
Yeah.
The revetment option is not going to ruin parking, okay? Because we were going to reconfigure the circle to do that. And it is possible, we've gone through that, and it would require moving things around a little bit, pulling the circle up a bit. We're constricted by access to the treatment plant, access to pulling the floats out, and access to the wharf and other things. But there is a way to do it, and we can still have the parking that we wanted.
But there's still
But
a cost.
there's a cost associated with
That we haven't measured that cost as part of the evaluation of the cost of revetment.
We have a rough estimate of that, because we didn't even really come up with a full alternative, which is what we would be doing now at this point. So there's definitely a cost, but it is possible. And the other thing I'd like to point out to the camera is, revetment isn't my alternative, it's the one that we talked
Right.
about.
Right.
And I want something that's going to be cost effective and last, and I don't really care what it is. I want it to be, if you want to put in a pink wall out there and make it happen, and everybody says that's what we want, that's great, but I think
But the granite wall has a longer life.
the granite wall will be more stable in the long
Right.
Mike, I recognize that this is a moving target, there are issues that are rising and going away as this happens, but as of now, what is your hope would occur at the annual meeting? What would you like to be presenting to the villagers?
At the annual meeting, we will be presenting one or two cost alternatives, depending on how it works out under the budget we have, for the revetment and or this other option. And then we can decide at that time. one is going to be more than the other, okay? But then we would consider the beach and the longevity and, so it comes down to that, really.
And
So originally, we were gonna come up with a revetment option with 4 alternatives for parking and all that kind of stuff. But we're not gonna do that now. I think what makes sense is we come up with the one that gives us all the parking, because all summer, everybody said, I don't wanna lose the parking, okay? So that's clear, all right?
so there would, and I would assume that these 2 alternatives would be known by June or so.
Yes.
Which I'd like to get information out to the village so that if, at the annual meeting is where people are voting, that we have the people there who care about this.
Right, so the goal would be when they were at a certain design point, that they would have another public meeting. It would likely happen the same way it did last time, where it's before the height of the season, because they need to get it done by the annual meeting, so, but whoever can make it, we'll advertise it in advance.
And then, were there a decision to be made at the annual meeting, what would be the next step after that?
Then, I'm hoping that it would be approved, okay? And then the construction would take place in the 2020 budget, which is what we had talked about originally. So that would be, August 2019, and then the next year. it would-
Subsequent to the season, I'm guessing, starting in September or something.
Well, it could start in the spring conceivably.
They would do it off-season, so it would be done, I mean, in theory, it could start at the end of the year, depending on when they, I think it would be one of those things where it would work out with the schedule and
Thank you. Dick, did you have your hand up first? Dick, sorry.
Okay, sorry, I keep hearing granite wall, and if I remember correctly, that was one of those that was in the $350,000 range or something as far as cost. And then we'd have to do this dam, that's another $100,000?
No, that's part of the cost.
Oh, that's part of it, oh.
Yeah, all the alternatives that were vertical wall.
Oh, included that,
Yes,
okay.
what's not in there is the geotech work, which we had talked about, which we will have to look at what that's gonna cost.
And parking,
What's that?
whatever the cost was to redesign the.
Yeah, so we were looking at multiple options for the parking, where some of them would be cheaper, but we'd have less parking, and now we're only gonna look at the one with all the parking, and compare that to the granite, because that's, to me, those are the apples and apples, is what people are talking about.
Judy?
So 2 questions. Do we have geotech work that was done at the time of the rebuild of the wharf in 97, 98, whenever that was, that can be piggybacked? That might help in terms of the cost, I don't know. But the other point is, thinking forward to the warrant, assuring, because the warrant article on this would have to be written in the manner of approving the funding, which is approving the borrowing, so it has to be arbitrage. So we would maybe do 2 warrants, one for the revetment option and one for the granite wall. So theoretically, one would be voted up and one would be voted down, or they'd both be voted up and we'd still be talking about it. But that's how we have to construct the warrant, I think.
Yeah, so it's always about money, right?
Yeah.
What was approved at the annual meeting was a total of $40,000 for, just globally speaking, consulting and engineering work to figure out what we're going to do. Included in that was the North Street banking.
Which is my next topic.
Yeah, so, but nonetheless, there's a $40,000 max. And I guess at this point, the geotech work was never discussed as part of that funding. So certainly not my decision one way or another, but from a timing perspective, if we thought it was going to cost us ballpark $40,000 to complete the design work for whatever wall we're going to build, and I think that would hold true for granite or in kind or revetment or anything else, there is no money currently available for geotech work.
I'm hoping that the geotech work will be broken into 2 pieces. We do preliminary borings, enough to get to the cost estimate, right? And then we would put the rest of it in the second part.
Yeah, I'm just looking at it from the perspective of timing and financing. So that, to me, looks like a 2021.
Because we don't have authority to spend on geotech work.
Well, we could, because it's design and engineering. But if you do that design and engineering, then the other work that needs to be done to design the wall itself may become up short.
Let me be a little more clear. The goal is to get a full design, right, that is ready to go with minimal amount of geotech work, okay, and some assumptions. and then we would do geotech work once, if that was the option that was approved. We would then finish the geotech work to confirm that the design is good.
Which, all which is fine.
Yeah, and that could be done.
Doesn't change where I'm at hardly at all, because I don't know whether what you're talking about for that preliminary work is a $5,000 expense, a $1,000 expense, a $10,000 expense.
Right.
I'm just saying, you've got this pool of money.
I
And to
understand.
me, it has always felt limited
Yeah.
and pretty tight intentionally.
Let me put it this way, I am not planning on going a nickel over the $40,000 for that, and then what we're gonna talk about in a minute with the noise.
No, I understand. But sometimes when you get into these things, you discover that, well, we wanted to do this, and we're not going to because we don't have the money, but that postpones or changes what we're doing.
Lee, we have somebody here that has experience in what the original wall was and has knowledge, more knowledge than anybody on this board has, on that wall and about the geotech, all that stuff. And that's Alden Battershaw. And I'd like to hear his comments on some of this stuff.
Comment be brief, 2 points.
Mr. Battershall, could you actually, would it...
I don't want to sit in front of that camera.
I don't understand. Well, it's just that it's, for those who are watching, it's going to be, here we go. We'll just do a little swim.
I'll do the rotate.
Thank you so much.
Well, 2 points that this board needs to listen to and think about. Back when I was younger and on the Overseers, this building was falling down because of poor construction, and this foundation cost you $35,000. And the reason the building's still here, the Overseers spent that much money, which was a lot of money back then, to save this building. So, talking about the seawall, the seawall was $5 grand. The timber was cut up on Barton Estate up here on the hill and brought down, and it was constructed for, I'd say again, $5,000 with no permit, by rule. Today, listening to you people, there are so many obstacles that you need to go the right way, and the right way for me, what I'm thinking about, is to put a granite wall in, pay the price, get it done right, and the Board of Overseers in 50 years won't have to be going through this again. If you look at Belfast granite wall, that's been there for 30, 40 years, and hasn't moved. So I think what you need to do is to bite the bullet and do it right and spend the money. And if I was on the committee and I was going to do this, which I never will be, I live in Northport now, I would put out to good contractors the option of building it with a quote from all three, with a bond to protect yourself, and go that way without a whole lot of expense of engineering. I've heard geotech going on and there's engineering going on, and that goes ka-ching, ka-ching, ka-ching. And there are a lot of good contractors that will give you a price or a quote to do it, and you won't have to do it. They will take care of the engineering, the permit, the whole thing. You just pay the bill and you can get, there's a lot of people out there that can do this. All you got to do is decide if you want it on a granite, or you want it on pressure treated wood, or you want logs cut up on the hill again. So that's about all I can say about it. But the other thing, one thing I'll say, that if you want the beach, you've got to have a vertical wall. If you go to a rubber wall, you just go down and look by the yacht club, you'll see what you get. Boulders, boulders, driftwood, and boulders.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for turning that.
Thank you, Mike, for assisting with the logistics there. I think we should, knowing that there's an 11:30 meeting coming up for governance
I didn't
committee.
finish.
I know, but I think that this particular conversation perhaps,
The North Ave will be real quick.
please,
Just let me finish, if you don't mind.
absolutely.
I want to hear
Yeah, so, we have gotten a quote for about $2,500 to $3,000 to do the work, permit by rule, through the Tootsie Roll method. And the Tootsie Roll method is putting basically some socks of dirt and seed and so on, and try to get it to hold for a while. And we're thinking we'd like to try that and see what it does. At the same time, because the engineering company would be doing this, we'd have them look at what a long-term solution would be if this doesn't work. But it should buy us some time so that we don't have to do it when we're doing the wall and everything else. So it seemed like worth a try because DEP loves it, so to get back to the whole, permitting issue, they just say yes to that. So all the money we were gonna spend on permitting would be
I
saved.
think you'll get a permit by rule for that.
Exactly. We get a permit by rule for that.
Yeah.
And Paul.
That's easy.
Yeah, that's part of his quote to get that. And-
That's for Naki.
Yeah.
Just don't go out beyond the high tide line,
Right.
because those boulders out near the
Right.
low water,
Yeah.
they have a purpose.
Yeah, he's a little short on details, so we will have to work on that a bit, and I'll get everyone to help me with that.
Just so I understand, we're talking about the edge of North Street, am I correct?
Yes.
The bottom of North Street, that's where it falls off the edge there.
Right.
Just so everyone understands what
Behind
we're referring
Orange's
to.
old house and in front of the other house.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah,
Thanks.
in between one north and one south. What's the other?
Mr. Overhog and
What's the other road?
One north, one south.
Yeah, one north.
Right.
I'm sorry. Yeah, right there.
Do we need, is this an expense you've already accounted for, or is this a new expense?
No, we're all set. We're all set. That's why I said it's.
Okay.
It's part of the design budget we already have. What's that?
It's in the 40 grand.
Yeah,
Since it's part of the 40,
Right. And
thank
we're
you.
trying to minimize that so that we have room for whatever.
sounds like a
Wonderful.
appropriate approach.
Thank you very much.
No,
Says me who knows nothing.
Utility Committee, since we have Mr. Crowley here, I'd love to have your report on the Utility Committee, unless it needs to be, but since we rarely have you in attendance.
I don't know why I stayed.
Make it brief, David.
Oh, well, we met.
All's well.
Everything's great, we haven't had a violation in forever.
You need this.
Okay. We looked at a permit, a request for a sewer change, which needs to be approved by you. This is an existing house, it has an existing line, and they would like to reroute their sewer line from the existing line to another place where they have better gravity drainage, because at this point they have to climb up on a relatively royal throne in order to relieve themselves, whereas they'd like to sort of get down to the plebeian level from ground level.
Very politely expressed.
And so we voted on this, and I signed this, but it needs to be signed by you.
So I move that the overseers accept the
This is
recommendation of the utility
7 C
trustees
Street, Smiths.
for the Smith House.
Go to the Smith House. Is there a second for that? Any discussion? All in favor? It's unanimous?
No, it's not unanimous.
It's unanimous, there are 4 people around the table.
Oh.
We also signed would you call it a contract, Judy, with Dorigo for the design work on the 8-inch water line up Cove Road and for the various refits that are going to be done for the sewer down on down in the park. The total for that was, I wrote it down somewhere, but it's 5 for one and 3 for the other for the design work. And so I signed that, and that's been sent back to Dorigo. Our sewer tanks got their annual end of the year pump out, 26,000 gallons, 2 tons of solids. The hydrant that was installed up on Merrithew Square is in place. It's not as far back from the side of the road as we would have wished, but that was just how things went. A few people have complained that we put up these 2 big ugly yellow things on either side of it, and we said, well, maybe we could paint them some prettier color. But they need to be there to protect it from the plow. That came in under budget, surprisingly, but the whole thing was $6,700 instead of $7,500. All of our pumps got inspected by Stevens. We've been worried that we irritated them 2 years ago, because they didn't show last year, but they showed this year, and they've done all the pump inspections. Billy's got most of the water shut-offs done, and the last lingering lake birds that are going to fly away after Thanksgiving, and it'll be done. And if anybody wants to know, the distance between our outfall and the proposed NAF outfall is 1.466 miles, or 7,741 feet. Our outfall goes out 600 feet. The only two action items were that we signed that letter to Durigo, and we approved the permit.
And the new hydrant, the other one, which is on Broadway further down, that's operational too?
So we have two,
There's the one at Merrithew.
and then there's the one up at the corner of Park Road.
Right.
And Billy, is the other one removed yet, or is going to be removed?
The one across from the Park Row one has been removed.
Right, that was part of that.
There's still some landscaping work on that will wait till spring, because the ground's got to settle where we did that.
So, yeah,
And- I mean, if everybody in the world complains about the yellow post, we can paint them red like a fire hydrant. It is where it had to be.
Great.
And the utility bills, as Amy said before, will be in your mailbox and pay them on time.
Got it. Thank you very
I
much.
can't think of anything else.
Any questions for Dave? Thank you. Safety Committee is last on here, but I think that we've indicated that that's an issue that's ongoing, and I'll send some notes out to the overseers in the next few weeks. Town of Northport issues. I don't know if anybody here, I put this on, we agreed that we were going to have a sort of placeholder in our agenda for Town of Northport issues, and that people would be attending. And I've talked with Barbara Ashley, and that we would be attending in a somewhat ad hoc basis, and she was comfortable with that. And she agreed that relations between the Town of Northport and this board were excellent, and she just wanted to maintain it. Are there any issues in particular that people are aware of that we should be tracking? And we'll move on to, once again, comments by meeting attendees. Anything further that anyone here has to say? Questions?
You said that we asked for, and we get $25,000 a year from the Town of Northport, because they also get, they get to use our dock and so on. In point of fact, we originally got that money back because we maintain a lot of roads that they don't maintain, and so that when this all went back to the school, and when it goes back in history. But in point of fact, it's not just that we provide them access to the water, but we also do significant road work and maintenance that cost us money that theoretically we could just dump on them. We also sort of provide sewer and water solutions which are not included in that $25,000, but it's more than just because we're nice and we're here. It's because we provide municipal services that they would otherwise have to provide.
Good point. Anything else from anyone? See, now we'll move on. And under new and continuing business, we had discussed, Steve, you had mentioned the idea of a personnel HR committee, and I still think that's a good idea. I would like to take the 2-month break again, likewise, to sort of approach that.
Entirely.
Okay, and think about how that might happen. Our next meeting is at 9 a.m. on Sunday, January 13th. We take habitually a break over December. Be some work that some of us will be doing in that period. We will be going into executive session now, so we'll have to clear the room. Thank you all for attending.